On a freezing winter morning in rural Washington, the kind of morning where the air smells sharp with pine and frost clings to the ground, a quiet Christmas tree farm became the scene of something no one could have imagined. The rows of evergreen trees stood perfectly still, as if guarding a terrible secret. There were no screams heard, no neighbors calling the police, no alarms triggered. Just silence. When authorities finally arrived, they were met with a sight that would haunt investigators for decades. Multiple lives taken in a place meant to represent warmth, family, and celebration. No forced entry. No signs of a struggle visible from afar. And no clear explanation for why anyone would commit murder in such a peaceful setting. What should have been a symbol of Christmas joy was suddenly marked by fear, confusion, and blood in the snow, beginning one of Washington's most disturbing cold cases. The Pacific Northwest is often described as calm, quiet, and safe, especially in its rural communities where everyone knows each other and crime feels like something that happens somewhere else. Christmas tree farms, in particular, are seen as wholesome places, family-run businesses filled with tradition, routine, and trust. That's what made this crime so shocking. The victims were not strangers. They were familiar faces, people who worked the land, greeted customers, and lived ordinary lives. There was nothing about them that suggested danger followed them home. Yet someone walked onto that farm with deadly intent, carried out the crime, and vanished without leaving behind a single solid lead. Investigators quickly realized this was not a random burglary gone wrong. Nothing of value was taken. The farm remained untouched. It was as if the killer came for one reason only, and then disappeared back into the woods. As detectives began piecing together the timeline, the mystery only deepened. The murders appeared calculated, yet strangely quiet. There were no witnesses, even though the area wasn't completely isolated. No neighbors reported suspicious vehicles. No one remembered seeing a stranger. Evidence that could have helped solve the case was scarce, and what little existed raised more questions than answers. Was this someone the victims knew and trusted? A business dispute that turned deadly? Or a person who understood the farm well enough to move in and out without being noticed? Each theory seemed possible, yet none could be proven. Interviews led nowhere. Suspects were questioned and released. Promising leads slowly went cold. As weeks turned into months and months into years, the case began to fade from headlines, but not from memory. For the families left behind, life split into a clear before and after. Holidays became painful reminders of what was lost. For investigators, the case became a constant frustration, a crime scene that refused to speak, a killer who left almost nothing behind. Over time, evidence deteriorated, memories blurred, and witnesses moved away or passed on. The Christmas tree farm murders quietly joined the growing list of unsolved cases in Washington, yet something about it continued to stand out. The setting, the timing, the absolute absence of answers. Today, decades later, this case still raises the same haunting questions. How does someone commit murder in such a peaceful place and vanish without a trace? How many details were overlooked in the early days? And could one small mistake, one forgotten observation, be the key to finally solving it? This is the story of a crime that shattered a community, challenged investigators, and proved that even the most tranquil places can hide unimaginable darkness. On the surface, the Christmas tree farm looked exactly the way it always had. Rows of tall evergreens stretched across the land, their branches heavy and dark green, standing quietly under the gray Washington sky. The air was cold enough to sting the lungs, and the ground was damp from recent rain, carrying that sharp, clean scent of pine and earth. It was the kind of place people associated with warmth, family traditions, and holiday memories. But beneath that peaceful appearance, something had gone terribly wrong. When authorities arrived, they knew almost instantly that this wasn't an accident, and it wasn't random. This was a deliberate act of violence carried out in a place where violence didn't belong. The victims were discovered on the farm in a way that immediately unsettled even seasoned investigators. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken doors or shattered windows, no chaotic destruction that usually accompanies violent crime. The scene was eerily calm, almost staged by its stillness. It felt as if the killer had taken their time, moved with purpose, and left without panic. That alone made the case deeply troubling. Crimes like this usually leave behind something, a mistake, a trail, a witness. But here, there was almost nothing. As news spread through the surrounding community, disbelief quickly turned into fear. This wasn't a big city where crime was expected. This was rural Washington, where people left their doors unlocked and waved to neighbors they'd known for decades. The victims weren't outsiders or reclusive figures. They were part of the community's fabric. People recognized their names, their faces, their routines, and that familiarity made the murders feel personal, even to those who had never set foot on the farm. Investigators immediately began reconstructing the final hours before the murders. They mapped out who had last seen the victims alive, what time they were expected to be somewhere else, and when concern first arose. Every detail mattered. Phone calls, errands, conversations that might have seemed insignificant at the time. But as the timeline formed, one disturbing reality became clear. There was a window of time where the murders could have happened without anyone noticing anything unusual. No loud arguments, no gunshots reported, no suspicious vehicles remembered. Just a quiet gap where lives were taken and a killer slipped away. The location itself added another layer of complexity. The farm was surrounded by dense woodland, offering countless paths for someone to approach unseen and disappear just as easily. Anyone familiar with the area would know how to move without being spotted. That raised an unsettling possibility. This may not have been a stranger at all. It may have been someone who knew the farm, knew the land, and knew the victims well enough to predict their movements. Early on, detectives explored the possibility of a robbery gone wrong, but that theory quickly fell apart. Money was left behind. Equipment remained untouched. There was no sign that anything had been taken. This wasn't about theft. That realization narrowed the focus, but made the motive harder to understand. If the killer wasn't there for valuables, then they were there for something else: revenge, control, anger, or something deeply personal. As interviews began, investigators spoke to family members, friends, employees, and neighbors. They asked the same questions repeatedly, hoping that repetition would trigger a forgotten detail. Did anyone seem upset recently? Any conflicts? Any strange phone calls? Any unfamiliar vehicles seen near the farm? But the answers were frustratingly ordinary. Life had been normal. No threats, no warnings, no obvious enemies. The victims hadn't expressed fear or concern about anyone. If there was a motive, it was hidden well. Meanwhile, the physical evidence offered little help. Whatever the killer used, they left behind almost nothing traceable. No clear fingerprints, no identifiable footprints, no weapon recovered. Forensic technology at the time was far more limited than it is today, and investigators knew that if they didn't catch a break early, the case could slip away forever. Every day that passed made it less likely that witnesses would remember small details or that physical clues would survive weather and time. As weeks passed without arrests, rumors began to spread. In small communities, silence creates space for speculation. Some believed the killer was an outsider passing through. Others were convinced it had to be someone local, someone hiding in plain sight. Friendships grew tense. Neighbors looked at each other differently. People locked doors that had never been locked before. The farm, once a symbol of holiday joy, became a reminder that safety was fragile. Detectives revisited the scene again and again, hoping something new would stand out. They walked the land, studied sightlines, and imagined how the crime unfolded. Where did the killer park? How did they approach? How did they leave? The lack of answers was maddening. It felt as though the farm itself was keeping the secret, refusing to give up the truth of what happened among the trees. As the investigation dragged on, leads began to dry up. Tips slowed. Media attention faded. Resources were redirected to newer cases with fresher evidence. The Christmas tree farm murders were officially labeled a cold case, but for the families, the pain never cooled. Holidays became reminders of absence. Each passing Christmas felt heavier than the last. Years later, new detectives reviewed the case files, hoping modern eyes might catch something old ones missed. They re-examined photographs, reread witness statements, and questioned assumptions made early on. But without new evidence, progress remained painfully slow. The case existed in a strange limbo, too haunting to forget, too complex to solve.